Hello again and welcome once again to Sewing with Mrs. B. In our first video I showed you a running stitch, which I told you is also sometimes known and can sometimes be used in the context of this thing, the basting stitch. Today I'm going to show you how to do a backstitch. And a backstitch is like the first cousin of the running stitch because there are many things about the way we make a backstitch that are exactly the same as how we make a running stitch. There's one key difference and it's this back bit, but we'll get to that in a second. Curious fact, back in the day, the day long ago before sewing machines were invented and when all sewing work had to be done by hand, this stitch, the back stitch, was the most common stitch used in garment construction. And the reason for that is that it's nice and tight and it goes over itself, so it makes a really strong stitch. I'll show you an example of the back stitch just here. So if you look very closely, this isn't a thick line of thread, not one single thick line, it's a whole lot of little stitches worked really evenly and then next to each other, immediately next to each other. So one solid line. If you look on the back of this example, and I'll just grab a pin to pull the stitches apart slightly so you can see. Again, it looks like one solid line of thread, but if you look really closely, there's actually two, and the stitches are kind of going over the top of each other. So you can kind of see that. So I'll show you how to make a back stitch, which is a really good, strong stitch that if you only have hand sewing available to you, or if you need to construct something by hand, is the perfect stitch to use. I've already threaded my needle. That was in the previous video, so if you need to go back and have a look at that one, you can do that anytime. And again, I've got my little piece of felt that I'm using for my samples. Okay, we're going to start this in exactly the same way as we started the running stitch. From the back, so I've got my little knot in the end there, and we're going to go all the way through. So far so good. The first stitch is also exactly the same as a running stitch. Straight down, I'll use that stabbing motion. And the next bit is also exactly the same. I'm going to come up, I'm going to try to keep the space here about the same as my stitch length. Pull it all the way through. Now if I was doing a running stitch, I'd keep going that way. But this is a back stitch, it's a different type of stitch. And I'm going to go backwards. Instead of going there, I'm going to go back to exactly where this thread went through the fabric there. And I'm going to go down. And then I'm going to go all the way over to, try and make it the same length, all the way over to here. So where I might have gone if I was doing a running stitch and I was only going one up and down, and then pull through, and then back to where that last thread came through. Now, as with the running stitch, you can use the stabbing action where you stab through, or you can, oh, and there's the thread getting twisted like happened last time, so let's just let that spin out. Or you can, as you get better, lay the needle across your work like that to work this stitch in half as many actions. So I've gone all the way back to where the previous stitch ended, and then underneath where the thread comes out to where my new stitch is going to end in one motion. One, and through, and then through. So this is quite a big stitch, and if you are going to sew a garment by hand, say you're recreating something from, well, let's see, the Georgian era, the Regency period, and if you ever get a chance to look at any garments from that that time and place, you'll see that the back stitches are tiny. They're itty bitty. They're almost that small, and they're worked so finely and neatly. It's a bit hard to do with this felt because it's thick. And it's so fascinating to think of all those men and women, because men sewed as well, making all those clothes using just this action over and over and being so fast and neat. Quite astonishing. Anyway, enough of a history lesson. If you're still learning, don't worry about going fast and don't worry about making tiny stitches. Concentrate on making even stitches, and I'll just start again and go back in the other direction. And if you can, on that action where the needle lies flat against the surface of your fabric. That is a back stitch. Once you get to the end, and I'd better show you this because this is one of those stitches where you will end up with a little loop on the back that you can work with. Oh, this embroidery thread's tricky to... Here we go. Okay, so let's go to the back. Just wanted to make sure I had enough thread there to show you this. So if you remember when we did the running stitch, I had to take a little extra stitch in the back of my fabric just to make sure the knot was secured. With the back stitch, you don't have to do that. You can use one of the loops that's already there. If you want to take a little bit of the surface, you can, and that's a decision you'll have to make if you're using something that's going to be under a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, so something that needs to be super strong. But for now, we're just going to use one of the loops that's here. So I'm just going to go under that. Oh, it's all right. I don't need the needle for this. One, and that's why you don't leave your threads too short. It's harder to work with. One and two. So there we go. Oh, this one's turned into a nice little neat figure 8. You can see how the knot's made. And we're going to just wriggle that down. Wriggle, wriggle, wriggle. Make it lie flush against the surface of the fabric. And there we go. Nicely done. Same as we did before, we're going to trim this thread a little bit. And that's back stitch.